Welcome to this introductory video on Pelican, the enterprise risk management system from Vose Software. To begin, we log in using the login screen. So we enter our credentials. And sign in. When Pelican opens, it opens on the main overview analytics page, which will be customized according to the individual user that signed in. And you'll see there are a number of different interfaces that are available. Those interfaces and the amount of information contained within each interface is dependent on the role of the person and the rights of access that that person has. This person, for example, is an admin and has rights to everything, including all of the administration settings of the system. However, if we had logged in as another person, we would see a different image. For example, this person here is a chief executive, and so they have a more limited range of interfaces that they can look at. We begin with how Pelican is set up. The first place to go is here in the settings under impact type. And you will see that there are a number of different types of impact that one can have. Financial is an obvious one, health and safety, reputation, environmental damage. You can also include delays for projects and for strategic risks. And these can either be qualitative or quantitative. And if they're quantitative, they will have units assigned to them. And they can either be impacts that are defined globally or used globally, like financial impacts that are used globally, or they can be related to a project. They can also be assigned inheritance, threshold inheritance, meaning that, for example, health and safety is something that's assigned at the top level entity, and whatever the measures of risk appetite are for health and safety and for reputation, these are transferred all the way down through the entity structure. Next, we consider access management. Within access management, we have security groups. These define who can see what types of information. You have different security groups. You have members who are assigned to any one of these security groups. And then for a given security group, you can see the information, the interfaces that a person is allowed to see. Next, we look at entities. Entities are the different elements of the corporate structure. So we start at the top level, the corporate global entity, and then we work our way down through different divisions and subdivisions and sub-subdivisions, all the way down at the final endpoint, you have projects. At the corporate level entity, we have the impact thresholds, which define our risk appetite, what we mean by an extremely low or extremely high catastrophic sector risk. So health and safety, reputation, strategic, environmental damage, these are all defined by editable phrases that reflect the corporate value that it assigns to different types of impact. If we go further down the level, then you'll see for another division, you will see a different financial scale. And if we go down to an individual project, then we will see both financial scale and days of delay. So for example, 300 days delay for this project would be catastrophic, and 40 days of delay would be a medium impact. For each entity, we have the access rights. These are the different security groups that can access the information about that entity. So any security group here can see the information for this entity and all other entities that are below it. Next, we look at categories. Categories are the ways that we describe risks into different divisions so we can create work breakdown structures. Here we have a custom category where, for example, location. You've assigned to risks, and you can see that we can create a structure of different locations, Europe and North America, etc. We can add all sorts of different layers as we wish. So for example, in East Flanders, where we are now, I can add a new child value. Let's say Brugge. This is easily editable by anybody who has the access rights to this particular categories interface. We also need to assign users. There are two types of user. The first is the individual person. You see the different information they have here. You can have how to get hold of them by phone. Also the email, which is used for sending alerts. The phone can be used for sending SMS messages, etc. So we have individual users, but we also have companies. Now the companies can be part of the entity structure, but you can also have external companies. The reason for having external companies will be understood when we look at some of the other interfaces, but they allow us to recognize that it could be that external parties are controlling some of the risks that we face. For example, a contractor, a supplier, or even a government regulator. Once we have created the setup, we can begin entering information about different risks. There are two different ways of entering risks, the quick risk and the bowtie risk. The quick risk is a common way of, reflects a common method that is used in risk registers and will be familiar to everybody. So we can look at risks, say, at any different entity level. Here we've got risks for Bradford Industries. The first one on the list, Brexit requires pullout from the UK. And you can see some basic pieces of information in here. We can click on this hyperlink. And it will show a lot of information. There's a basic information here. It will show a complete log of the history of any edits that have been made to this risk, any notes that people have added, and documents that can be downloaded, the reference documents, perhaps about, in this case, effective Brexit. So we can click on that, and it will download that particular file. You can see any activities that need to be done. Some of these activities are in the future, and you can see any logs of activities that have been completed. So for example, when this activity over here becomes something that one needs to do from the start date, then, and it's completed, then it will be shown here that it's completed, or it will show that it's overdue, etc. And also if we have had any incidents associated with that risk, they will appear here. Going back to the risk information, you can see that we can edit the risk information here, basic information, which is what we add into Pelican to describe the risk. So you've got the name of the risk, the entity that it's associated with, the owner, the status, whether it's active or draft, expired or closed, the type of impact, in this case strategic, and this is one of the lists of the different types of impact that are already defined, and we can see the descriptions and the selection of the level of impact before and after risk management and the probabilities before and after. You can also add some description about the risk. Under the categories, you will see the location. For example, we just added Brugge as one of the locations that now appears here. We could change that information there. And if there are things like equipment or hazard or other types of categories, we can fill them all in. And this later allows us to create risk breakdown structures. We can take these quick risks, which are very simplistic ways of describing risk, and we can convert them to a bow tie, which we'll see in a little bit. in tables like this, we have a constant look and feel about them. We can also customize what we want to see as an individual by changing the number of columns. So here we've got a column changer, and we can, for example, take a location, drag and drop it up here. So we're now seeing the location. And then we can save that layout for ourselves. We can, if we're an administrator, we can save the layout as the default for the company. With quick risks, we can also do a simple analysis. So we're looking at Bradford Industries, and we can see the magnitude of the impacts here in scoring systems. So you can see the largest to the smallest risk. Here we're showing it in terms of global impact, and here in terms of the entity itself, which are the same, but they will change if we change to a different entity. So this is the entity impact here for this particular entity, and that's its global impact. We can also apply filters if we want to look at only specific sets of risks, and we can apply the filters over here, down here, when multiple different types of filters. Or for example, we could define filters up here if we only wanted to look at, say, legal risks or financial risks or whatever it is. We can select them in here. These types of reports, which are analyzing the different types of element, they can be customizable. So one can have different types of information built into them as the client requires. All of the information can be exported to Excel, to PDF, or rich text format. And that applies to all of these tables that you will see within Pelican. A more rich way of describing risks is using bow ties. With bow ties, we can edit the information, basic information that's described, and that's very similar to what we saw before. We can look at a bow tie view or a table view of this particular risk, and we can clone it. Cloning it if we want to use the same logic that you're applying to one risk from one entity to another. So we can click on bow tie view. And this will show a typical bow tie structure. On the left-hand side, we have the drivers, which might cause the risk to occur, the risk events itself, and the different consequences. Here we have reputational consequence, financial, two more financials. And you'll notice that a risk is already a driver to the second risk, and this risk here is a driver for a third one. The consequence from that is the driver to be a driver for a third risk. You'll notice that there is quantitative information in here everywhere, and automatically the frequencies and probabilities are calculated. It's all done by Monte Carlo simulation within the system. So for example, for this control, this is a way of stopping this attempted automatic hack from becoming an IT hack system. We can change this information. At the moment, we're seeing 5.72 events. If I change that information in here, I take the status of this risk from being implemented and active to not working. Then you will see that everything is calculated to be larger. Now it's 10 events instead of 5.72. So there are different colors, mean different things. A gray icon means it's under consideration. A green means it's implemented and active. Orange means it's in the process of being implemented. And red means it's being implemented, but it is not working. So it's something we rely on, but it's no longer working. As well as being a visual display of risks, this is also an interface for being able to change the bow tie diagram. For example, we can add a new risk or a new driver here. So we can add a new driver or an existing driver, which is something that is already in the system, or we can link it to another risk or another consequence. Similarly, we can add a new consequence, and it's either a new consequence or it's an existing consequence from somewhere within the database. The ability to be able to share drivers and to be able to share consequences is an extremely important part of Pelican. Much like the ability to share, controls between different risks, for example, or mitigations, like an insurance policy could be a mitigation strategy for a number of different financial losses, and that same insurance policy could be used across many different risks. Within the bowtie menu, we can look at the different risks, and we will see the risks ranked by their most important in terms of their total aggregate impact, all performed by Monte Carlo simulation built into the system. We can do an analysis on any one of the individual risks. We can look at individual risk in terms of a bowtie or a table view. We can export the information into Excel, PDF, and RTF as usual. We can change the columns, etc. We can also look at controls or mitigations, those actions we take to try to reduce our exposure to the risks. So for example, controls. Within each control, there are information about how much it costs us to implement the control and what the benefits we get, and it uses multi-attribute utility theory to figure out the benefits versus the cost of the individual controls. So here we have green working its way down. This is the most beneficial control, and if we were to rank in the opposite direction, we would see the least beneficial. We can click on any one of these different elements, and we can see an analysis of the results. So we see history, notes, documents. We see any information over here. We can assign alerts. Alerts can be assigned by any user to be able to see changes to those controls. For example, we want to see if the status has changed from one that is working to not working. We can be automatically informed of this. We can also look at analysis for that control. This is a customizable interface, and it will tell us any information we have about that particular risk or that particular control. We can also look at drivers. So for example, this driver here, if we look at a bowtie diagram, this is looking at a different view. It's saying we have one driver here, which is shared amongst many risks. How does this driver affect our risk portfolio? So this driver is a key factor behind all of these different risks, which in turn have all these different consequences. We can use that for processes, for example, a bank processing, or we could use it for something like a common factor like COVID-19 or coronavirus. We look at coronavirus, consider all of the different risks that the coronavirus is introducing and all of the different consequences that result from that. Looking in the opposite direction, we can look at a particular consequence and look at all the ways that that consequence might occur for various different risks and all the drivers and controls behind it. This allows us to give a very clean picture of how it might be possible that this particular banking consequence, in this case, could possibly occur, and all the different strategies, whether they're working or in place, that try to reduce the probability or the impact of that risk. Notice that the calculation here is taking into account all possible ways that this risk might occur, calculating the total final frequency. And also notice that this is 60 events is a frequency because this is a risk that could occur multiple times. Pelican is not restricted to just describing risk as only being possible to have occurring once with a probability. It also allows you to have the possibility that risk like strikes or some processing failure can occur many times. We also have bowtie maps. These allow us to see how different risks are all interrelated. Here, for example, we have one risk that may occur, which can be a driver for a second risk. And you can see that, for example, this control has a lot of value because it not only will prevent this risk from occurring, which prevents these two consequences, but because this risk won't occur, it will reduce the probability of this next risk occurring with all of its consequences. When Pelican calculates the value of this particular control, it takes into account the complete coverage of protection that this control is providing. Pelican also provides templates. So one could describe the bow tie diagram for a generic type of risk that can be deployed into every different entity as you wish. So for example, here we have a web server hacked. If we can go and look at the view, bow tie view of that. And this is generic information of all the different controls and mitigations that somebody might want to apply. So you only really need to think about this web server being hacked, all of the different ways it might happen, the different controls and mitigations and different consequences. You need to just do that once, and then you can provide that information to each individual entity, and you can deploy it for that entity. So you select the entity you want to deploy it to submit. You can select multiple entities if you wish. And now that will appear as a draft risk, bow tie risk, within that particular entity. Now that we've entered all the information, we can start to use it. So for example, schedule risk. Pelican has the ability to run Monte Carlo simulations of projects on standard applications called Tamara, and it will therefore estimate the uncertainty about how long it will take until a project will be finished and the uncertainty about the total cost of the project. Tamara, the project risk analysis software, can be linked into Pelican so that it pulls all of that risk information into Pelican and then it sends it back into Pelican. So here we're seeing an overview, schedule exposure overview, where you see these different projects and the base finish date in red versus what is estimated to be the actual finish dates in a box plot. This can be automatically updated just with a couple of clicks. Then we have quantitative risk analysis. This is a set of risk analysis models built in Excel and with either at risk or with model risk. And we can use this to build Monte Carlo simulation models that everybody has access to and everybody can use. So for example, of these sets of different risk models, I can go into one here, op risk. And you can see some basic information, some history, notes and documents. And down here, the different versions. So you can create as many different versions of the model you want. And once you've created them, you can run simulations. And then you can compare the different simulation results. So for example, this could be a standard model that we run every month, and we maybe want to track how that changes from one month to another. So let's go and pick one of these and just edit it. This opens and shows a spreadsheet emulator, and I can start changing the information if I want. Gen 6 and 3, etc. It won't allow me to put in impossible values, so negative value in here. If I try and put that in, it won't allow it. It will say that it must be greater than 0. I can create a new scenario. I can tell it, give it a name. I can change the C value. I can schedule runs, so it can be on not manually, but it could be done every week or every month. So for example, if you have this connected, same spreadsheet model, and it's connected to data within Pelican that is constantly changing, maybe you want to run it every month or every week and have those results available to you automatically. When we've created different versions of the model and we've run them, then we can compare the results. So by comparing results, we're comparing graphs and statistics of several different simulation runs. Maybe it's the same type of analysis for a financial project. We want to compare the net present value or EBITDA between different projects. We can do this, first of all, by setting the template for this particular model. So here we have different types of graphical results, and we can edit them and say what we want to be included in each of these, or we can create new ones. Once we've created these different types of templates, then when we run a simulation model, and then we want to look at the results, either by looking at the individual results down here or by comparing up here, when this opens, it will allow us to see the results from two different simulations side by side. So we have a chart on the left-hand side. We could have chosen any number of the different defined charts. And then on the right-hand side, we're looking at the different simulation results that we want to compare. So perhaps we want to compare forecast here against a different forecast here. We can look at the total losses. We can look at Pareto plots. Any number of different types of graphs that one can create with Monte Carlo simulation. Using Monte Carlo simulation with spreadsheet risk analysis models in a web-based environment is a very unique feature of Pelican. You won't find it anywhere else, but it's not the only unique feature. One of the greatest challenges that people have faced in risk management is to follow ISO 31000 guidelines to look at the strategic importance of risks. So we have a strategy capability here. So first of all, we have a number of different strategic goals that this entity wants to achieve. Among them, for example, they want to get an EBITDA of 3.2 billion. So we click on that and we can see different tactics that are in place in order to be able to try to achieve this. So for example, establish a presence in EMEA. This has got a 27% chance of failure. Why? It's because of these different threats here. These are global aggregated threats, and we can click through here and look at which of the risks is contributing the greatest, and I can click through that and see which is the most important risk in this particular category, environmental damage, which would prevent us from the success of this this tactic. Or as another interface to be able to define just how the different risks will affect the success of the tactics. And we have interfaces for doing that here. Under the analytics menu, we have all the different ways that one can look at the results. So for example, the overview is a customizable dashboard. So it can be completely changed for the individual entity. And this will show you different risks, what the aggregate scores of different types of risk. So these are all done by Monte Carlo simulation using multi-attribute utility theory rules. So you can see that you've got the biggest focus here is on environmental damage, 6 out of 10, financial, 8 out of 10, and health and safety. These are the ones that are perhaps strategy. These are the ones that are really driving the risk portfolio for that industry, for that entity. If we go down to a different entity, we will see that it looks very different. The biggest impact is financial, environmental damage, and health and safety are very low. And so on. In this particular setup, but again, it is completely customizable to show any information that you wish to show that is available within Pelican. You see here these different types of risks, developed meaning bowtie risks and undeveloped mean basic risks. You can see incidents here when they occurred and their magnitude. You can see the status of the different controls and mitigations. We have a tool for viewing KPIs. So for example, we've got these different KPIs here. The red shows that they're exceeding their goals. So here we've got a fraction of the barriers with a check that's overdue, and you can see what the graph looks like. There's our target of 3%, clearly not succeeding there. A PI table, which is equivalent to the probability or the heat map table that you will commonly see. We do not use heat maps because of the many different reasons for heat maps being considered to be misrepresentative of risks. So what we do instead is we have similar common features. We have on the horizontal axis the different magnitudes from nil to catastrophic and everything in between. On the vertical axis, we can show probabilities of events or frequencies on the same scale, but you'll notice it goes beyond 1 because some risk can occur multiple times. So what we're seeing here are all these different risks, the top 10 for this particular Bradford Industries, but we can also look at, say, the top 20. We could look at only the reputational risks. And here you see the tadpole lines represent where the risks started off and what the benefits of these controls and mitigations have been. So although this risk appears to be very low, it really is relying on the fact that the controls and mitigations are genuinely working. So this is a good reminder that we just can't look at the final endpoints, we must look at where they came from as well. We could look at the financial risks, just those, and you'll see that the list of risk is constantly changing with a hyperlink, so you can go and investigate more detail about those individual risks. We can change the entity. So here, we'll change it to several streets, and you'll see all the risks appear here. So these are the consequences. There's the financial consequences that come, and perhaps multiple risks would have resulted in the same financial consequence. But we can also just look at risks. So for example, if you were to crash a car, there are multiple different consequences out of that one risk. So crashing a car is valuable in that or preventing it's valuable because you want to avoid, for example, losing money, losing the life of yourself, your family, other people. So this looks at actual risks and takes into account all of the different consequences. Again, this has all been evaluated internally using Monte Carlo simulation. As I said, we can go and dive into any of the individual risks here, gantry crane drop load. And you'll see all of the information about this particular risk. You can go and assign an alert to it. You can look at it as table view. You can do some analysis, and we can go and look at the bow tie. This gives us a good representation of exactly how it is with this gantry crane drops load, all the different consequences it might have had, and how we're trying to prevent that from occurring. There are plenty of other interfaces that are possible and dashboards. Because we perform aggregations of risks, we don't just count them, but we add up together probabilistically using Monte Carlo simulation all of the different consequences and then analyze them as an aggregate calculation. So for example, risk breakdown structure, this tells us where the risks are located and here demonstrated by area. So for example, we're looking at it broken down by location. And if we click in here, we can get more information about particularly where those risks were occurring. So I can change the entity back to the corporate entity. See the information change. We can look at it by other different groups. So instead of by location, we could look at it by entity, for example, and click through. You can see all the information. So this allows us to give us a visual picture of really where the risks are concentrated, either by any of the different risk breakdown structures we want to apply. We also have barrier ownership. I mentioned already that because we may use external third parties like contractors or suppliers or regulators, consultants, lawyer firms to try and manage some of our risk, it's a good idea to be able to understand how much of our risk is really being controlled by external third parties. So, for example, here for Bradford Industries, the green represents all of the internal controlled risks, and these are external controlled risks. So if I click through, I'll be able to see a list of all the risks that have been controlled by others, and I can click through again and see more information. So as I go through here, I will see that some of the entities are much more reliant on third parties than others. An obvious large value to risk analysis is to look at the financial possible losses. So for example, here we're looking at Bradford Industries, and this is the probability distribution in histogram and in cumulative terms of all the possible losses might occur. You can see here the different p-values or quantiles, so you can read off and understand where the risks are really lying. So we have a certain probability of being above, say, 0.6 million. You can read them off on the scale or on the graph itself. As we go down through the entities, we see quite different views. For example, if I were to go to Bradford Medical Devices, I would see a different distribution here, due to home appliances. You can see there's, for example, a large negative loss. That means a gain. That's because we've got a number of different opportunities, perhaps, which would be in the opposite direction to financial losses. Again, this is all done by Monte Carlo simulation. It has complete correlation. We don't use copiers, we use driving factors, which is a modern way of doing things. Copiers are an old method, although that is still possible within the QRA models. We have all of the QRA tools in there, like copulars and distributions and time series. We don't just have to look at the loss distribution, we can also change that into a tornado chart. And here we see the different risks. This is the largest risk that is driving the possible loss, but here is that opportunity, which has some possibility of maybe up to $10 million worth of benefit if it occurs. We can also look at top risks. Top risks allow us to display the largest risks that are faced by an individual entity. We can do this in different ways. For example, I can enter a threshold value like 3 million, and I will see the different risks which have the highest probability of exceeding that $3 million threshold. I can also go down to any one of the individual entities and see these risks, but I can do it differently. I can look at the box plot. So a box plot is a representation of the distribution of the different possible losses. I can rank them by, go to several streets, you can see them, the different box plots here. You can rank them by their median instead of the P75 or P95 or whatever. I can show the top 10 or the top 20, etc. Finally, we have a people interface. This allows me to look at how much we are dependent on individuals for managing the risk within our system. So here we have Julien Rouault. He has the greatest influence on responsibility for managing risk. And when you look at the aggregate, again, this is all calculated using internal Monte Carlo simulation. If I was to click on this table here, ranked by opportunities. You can see these 4 people, for example, are in charge of 4 different opportunities that are quite important. Pelican also has tools for communicating to individuals of tasks that they need to do or responsibilities they have or approvals that they need to meet. For example, in the My Items, you'll see My Alerts. These are alerts that you've set when a risk has changed and you get told that this change has occurred. Or perhaps we want to go to Outstanding Issues, where you can look at various different things that a person is being asked to deal with. Here, this person has been told that there is a potential issue, and we want to verify that it's truly an issue. And then we can assign it to an owner. So give it to Rex, date. Now Rex will have been assigned this particular risk to go and resolve and do an analysis on. As with all the tables, they can be exported to Excel, PDF, RTF. Pelican offers a great deal of optimization. If we go into the menu, we can, for example, we can change the KPIs. So we can create a new KPI, we can edit the KPI, and this is done very simply using SQL language. So any programmer should be able to do that. They can set a threshold, they can make it active, they can apply it to a particular entity, and there's a lot of different controls capable in there. We can clone a KPI, so we can apply it from one entity to another entity. And that all goes information that goes into the KPI dashboard. We also have a dashboard designer. So you saw that several different dashboards were there. For example, this one here for strategic overview. These are like every dashboard, they can be edited. So you click on one of the elements and you start changing the information, how it's bound to the data, or you can change its in its shape. You can move stuff around. You can do a lot. You can also add graphs, etc. And you can do this for any of the different dashboards that are in the system. You can create new dashboards as you wish as well. So this is for a dashboard for analyzing the mitigations, for example. This doesn't require any input from Vose Software. It could be done by any sysadmin person who's got some background in basic tools like this, which are standard Microsoft tools. We also have reports templates. So there are often reports we want to create, and we want to be able to produce one template of report and then very quickly ask to input the information, the latest information, and send it off to PDF. So for example, I can open an existing report, for example, an entity overview report, open it. And then this rather awkward looking document reflects all of the different components that will go into that report. So if I was to look in the report in a minute, you should be able to recognize what this looks like. We can, again, it's all drag and drop and binding to different types of information so that your IT people, they can do any kind of, make any kind of report themselves without any input from Vose Software. So finally, let's just look at reports. So we can create any type of report directly from this menu just by simply selecting it. So this has been assigned to Bradford Industries. We can edit the report, which will take us back to the previous thing, or report designer. We can go and click on the entity overview. And this will now create a report of all the latest information that is sitting inside Pelican. So I can look at this in terms of all of the different pages. filled with the latest information. You might not find this particularly attractive, but again, this is utterly customizable according to the information that you wish to put into the system. And then I can save it to PDF, to spreadsheet, to Word document, HTML, etc. So just save it to PDF. It's creating a report here. If I was to open that report, then you will see the information here, which can be shared with your colleagues. So that concludes the end of my demonstration of Pelican. I hope you found it of use. Of course, we are very open to questions, and thank you very much for your time.